They say revenge is a dish best served cold. I say it's best served with documentation, witnesses, and a lawyer who doesn't bill by the breath. My name is Robert Thornton, I'm 73 years old, and this is the story of how my ex-wife tried to ruin me, and how I made sure she failed spectacularly. It started on a Tuesday morning in March, unseasonably warm for Connecticut. I was sitting in my study, going through the mail like I did every morning since retiring from my accounting firm 15 years ago. Old habits die hard, and keeping track of finances had been my bread and butter for 45 years. That morning, a single envelope would change everything. The return address was from Hartford Financial Group, a credit card company I'd never done business with in my life. My first thought was junk mail, one of those pre-approved offers they send to every breathing human with a social security number. But something made me open it anyway. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was luck. Maybe God himself was looking out for me that day. Inside was a statement. For an account I didn't recognize. In my name. With a balance of $47,832. 19. My hand started shaking before my brain fully processed what I was looking at. The charges went back 6 months. Luxury hotels, high-end restaurants, jewelry stores, spa treatments. None of which I had visited. None of which I had authorized. And the billing address wasn't my current home in Hartford. It was my old address in West Hartford, the house I'd sold 3 years ago after the divorce. The house where my ex-wife, Margaret, still received mail because she'd been too busy to update her address with various institutions. The house where we'd spent 37 years of marriage before she decided she wanted something different. Someone different, as it turned out. I sat there for a long moment, the paper trembling in my arthritic fingers, and felt something cold settle in my chest. This wasn't a mistake. This was deliberate. Let me back up and tell you about Margaret. We married young. I was 24, she was 22. Fresh out of college, both of us hungry to build a life together. She was beautiful, sharp-witted, and had a way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room. We had 2 children, Michael and Sarah, who were now in their 40s with families of their own. We built a good life. A comfortable life. I worked hard, built my accounting practice from nothing, and Margaret managed the home and raised the kids with a competence I admired. But somewhere around our 30th anniversary, things changed. She became distant, critical. Started taking more trips to visit friends in Boston and New York. Came home with new clothes, new jewelry, a new attitude. When I questioned her, she said I was being controlling, that she deserved to enjoy life after decades of sacrifice. The divorce came when I was 68. She filed, claiming irreconcilable differences. In Connecticut, it's an equitable distribution state, which means the court divides marital property fairly, not necessarily equally, but fairly. We had assets, the house, my retirement accounts, savings, investments. The process was ugly. Her lawyer was aggressive, painting me as someone who neglected her emotionally for years while I built my career. My lawyer was competent but cautious, advising me to settle rather than fight. In the end, we split things roughly down the middle. She got the house initially, but then sold it within a year and took her half of the proceeds. I got my retirement accounts. We split the savings and investments. There was some debt, a mortgage that was nearly paid off, a car loan in her name, and a couple of small credit cards. The decree specified that we each took responsibility for debts in our own names, with the mortgage split proportionally. I thought it was over. I thought I could finally have some peace in my golden years. I was wrong. That credit card statement was just the beginning. Over the next week, I received 3 more. All for cards I'd never opened. All with my name. All with balances in the tens of thousands. The total was staggering, $186,439. 82. But it was the 5th letter that made everything click into place. It came from a debt collection agency, demanding payment for a personal loan from Fairfield Credit Union. The loan was for $75,000, taken out 18 months ago, 6 months before our divorce was finalized. The purpose listed on the loan application? Home renovations. I remembered that. Margaret had insisted we renovate the master bathroom and kitchen that year. She said it would increase the house's value before we sold it. I'd been skeptical. We were already talking about divorce at that point, but she'd been persuasive. Said it was an investment in our future, even if that future was separate. She'd handled all the arrangements, said she'd put it on a home equity line of credit we already had. I'd been a fool to trust her. I immediately pulled out my copy of the divorce decree and read through it again, carefully this time, with the eyes of an accountant looking for discrepancies. There it was, in Section 7, subsection C. Each party shall be responsible for debts incurred in their own name, with joint debts to be split as outlined in Schedule B. Schedule B listed our joint debts as of the date of filing. The mortgage. One joint credit card with a $3,200 balance. That was it. Nothing about these other cards. Nothing about this personal loan. Because legally, these weren't joint debts. They were in my name only, or so the creditors believed. The middle, assembling the pieces. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed in my small apartment, a 2-bedroom place in a quiet complex near Elizabeth Park, and stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. Margaret had always been clever. Charming. The kind of person who could talk her way into or out of anything. But I'd never imagined she was capable of outright fraud. The next morning, I did what I should have done years ago when we were going through the divorce. I pulled my credit report. All 3 bureaus, Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. I paid for the full reports with credit monitoring, not just a free annual summary. What I found made my blood run cold. There were 11 accounts I didn't recognize. Credit cards, personal loans, even a line of credit with a furniture store. The oldest had been opened 4 years ago, right around the time Margaret started talking about divorce. The most recent was from 2 months ago, 4 months after our divorce was finalized. Total debt in my name, $312,847. 66. Over $300,000. More than half of what I had in retirement savings. Enough to destroy my credit, my peace of mind, and potentially my ability to leave anything for my children and grandchildren. I printed everything. Every statement, every credit report, every document I could get my hands on. Then I started digging deeper. The signatures on the credit applications, I requested copies from each institution, citing identity theft concerns, were clearly forged. Margaret had always been artistic, had good handwriting, but these signatures were rushed, sloppy. More importantly, several of the applications had been submitted online, using an email address I didn't recognize, R. Thornton. finance@webmail.com. Not my email. Not an account I'd ever created. But it got better. Or worse, depending on how you looked at it. I called each creditor and requested transaction histories. It took weeks, some were cooperative, others required police reports, and I'll get to that in a moment, but eventually I had detailed records of every purchase made with these fraudulent accounts. The pattern was unmistakable. High-end purchases at stores Margaret frequented. Charges at restaurants where she told me she was meeting friends. Hotel stays in cities where she'd claimed to be attending conferences or visiting her sister. Even a $23,000 charge at a jewelry store in Stamford. I later confirmed through some careful social media stalking of her friends that she'd bought herself a diamond tennis bracelet for her 65th birthday. A gift. From herself. All on credit cards in my name. But the personal loans were the real masterpiece of deception. The $75,000 loan for home renovations? I drove out to West Hartford, to the house we'd sold, and spoke with the current owners. Nice couple in their 50s. I explained that I was the previous owner and was trying to track down some contractor receipts for tax purposes. A lie, but a harmless one. They invited me in for coffee, and we chatted. When I casually asked if they noticed any recent renovations, they laughed. The house was in great shape when we bought it, the husband said. Only thing we've done is paint the upstairs bedrooms. The kitchen and bathrooms looked like they were at least 10 years old, but well maintained. No renovations. The $75,000 had gone directly into Margaret's pocket. I found similar lies attached to the other loans. One was supposedly for medical expenses, but I checked with our health insurance, and Margaret had no major medical procedures during the relevant time period. Another was for business investment, but Margaret had never owned a business in her life. She'd been systematically stealing from me, using my credit, my name, my social security number for years. Building a nest egg for herself while positioning me to take the fall for all of it. The genius of it, and I had to admire the cold calculation even as it infuriated me, was the timing. Most of the debt had been incurred during our marriage, which made it legally complicated. In Connecticut, debts incurred during marriage are often considered marital debt, even if only one spouse's name is on them. If these had been legitimate debts, I might have been stuck with half of them anyway in the divorce. But Margaret had gone further. She'd hidden these debts during the divorce proceedings. Hadn't disclosed them to her own lawyer, let alone mine. She'd let me walk away thinking we'd split everything fairly, all while sitting on a time bomb of debt in my name that she knew would eventually explode. And here's where it got truly diabolical. Once the divorce was final, she'd kept going. Opening new accounts. Running up new charges. Knowing that if the creditors came after me, I'd have to prove I wasn't responsible. A much harder task than proving a debt should be split in a divorce. I needed to understand her plan fully. So I did something I'm not particularly proud of, but desperate times call for creative measures. I called my daughter Sarah. Sarah and I had a complicated relationship after the divorce. She was closer to her mother, had taken Margaret's side in the split, felt I'd been emotionally unavailable during her childhood. We spoke maybe once every few months, stilted conversations about the grandkids and the weather. But she was still my daughter, and I gambled that beneath the resentment, there was still some loyalty. "Dad?" She sounded surprised when she answered. "Is everything okay? I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. It's important." There was a pause. "What's going on? Has your mother said anything to you about financial problems? About debt, or creditors calling, or anything like that?" Another pause, longer this time. "Why are you asking? Please, Sarah. Just answer the question." I heard her sigh. She mentioned something a few months ago. Said she was having trouble with some bills, that you'd left her in a difficult position after the divorce. She said you'd agreed to pay certain debts but hadn't followed through. My hand tightened on the phone. "What debts specifically?" "I don't know, Dad." She didn't give details. Just said you were being vindictive, trying to ruin her credit because you were angry about the divorce. The pieces fell into place with an almost audible click. Margaret wasn't just trying to saddle me with the debt. She was building a narrative. Positioning herself as the victim, telling people, including our own children, that I was the one being unreasonable. When the creditors started coming after her, because surely they would eventually track down where their money had actually gone, she'd claim I'd authorized the charges and then reneged on paying them out of spite. It was elegant, in a sociopathic kind of way. "Sarah," I said carefully, "your mother has been lying to you. And I'm going to prove it." She tried to argue, but I cut her off. "Just keep an eye on her, okay? Pay attention to what she says about money, about debt, about me. And don't tell her we had this conversation." I hung up before she could respond. The next step was the hardest. I went to the police. The Hartford Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit was housed in a depressing building downtown, all fluorescent lights and beige walls. The detective who took my statement was a woman in her 40s named Ramirez, with tired eyes and the air of someone who'd heard every sob story imaginable. I laid out everything. The credit cards. The loans. The forged signatures. The timeline showing most of the debt had been incurred by someone who wasn't me, making purchases I could prove I hadn't made because I had alibis for many of the dates and times. Detective Ramirez listened, took notes, and asked questions. Good questions. Smart questions. Where was I on certain dates? Did I have receipts, credit card statements from my legitimate accounts showing I was elsewhere? Had I given my ex-wife access to my personal information? That last one was tricky. Of course I had. We'd been married for 37 years. She knew my social security number, my mother's maiden name, my date of birth. All the information needed to open credit accounts in my name. Mr. Thornton, Detective Ramirez said when I finished, I'm going to be straight with you. This is identity theft, and it's serious. But it's also complicated because the perpetrator is your ex-wife. Spousal identity theft cases are notoriously difficult to prosecute. Defense attorneys argue that there was implied consent because of the marriage, that the victim knew about the accounts, that it's a civil matter rather than criminal. But we're divorced now. I protested. And some of this happened after the divorce. Which helps your case. But you're still going to face an uphill battle. These cases take time, require extensive documentation, and even when we build a solid case, prosecutors sometimes decide it's not worth pursuing. I felt despair creeping in. So what do I do? She leaned forward, her expression softening slightly. You document everything. You file a police report, which I'm going to help you do right now. You dispute every fraudulent charge with the credit bureaus and the creditors. You hire a good attorney who specializes in identity theft and fraud. And you prepare for a long fight. But you will investigate? Yes. I'll investigate. I'll talk to the creditors, review the applications, check for security footage if any still exists. I'll interview your ex-wife. But Mr. Thornton, you need to be realistic about the outcome. Even if we prove she did this, the criminal justice system might not give you the result you want. I left the police station with a case number and a police report, but not much hope. That night, I sat in my apartment and thought about Margaret. Really thought about her, maybe for the first time in years. Tried to understand when she changed from the woman I'd married into someone capable of this level of deception and cruelty. The truth was, I didn't know. Maybe she'd always been capable of it, and I'd just been too blind to see. Maybe the divorce had broken something in her, made her feel justified in taking whatever she could. Or maybe, and this was the thought that kept me up at night, maybe I'd driven her to it somehow, through years of emotional distance and prioritizing work over family. But no. No, that was the victim-blaming narrative she wanted people to believe. I hadn't been a perfect husband, but I'd been faithful, responsible, present in the ways I knew how to be. I'd provided for my family, attended my kids' events, tried to be a good partner even when the passion faded into comfortable companionship. What Margaret had done wasn't revenge for emotional neglect. It was calculated theft, pure and simple. And I wasn't going to let her get away with it. Over the next 3 months, I became obsessed. I created spreadsheets. Of course I did. I was an accountant, tracking every fraudulent account, every charge, every piece of evidence. I requested bank statements from our joint accounts during the marriage, looking for patterns. I found them. There were regular transfers from our joint account to Margaret's personal account, always in amounts just under $10,000 to avoid triggering federal reporting requirements. The transfers were labeled as household expenses, or personal allowance, but they were far more than we'd ever agreed to. Over the course of our last 5 years of marriage, she'd siphoned off nearly $300,000. I'd missed it because I trusted her to manage our day-to-day finances while I focused on the bigger picture: retirement planning, investments, tax strategy. She'd taken advantage of that trust systematically. I also hired a private investigator. His name was Dennis Kowalski, a former cop who'd gone into private practice. He was expensive but thorough. I gave him Margaret's information and asked him to find out everything he could about her current financial situation and lifestyle. What he found was illuminating. Margaret was living well. Very well. She'd rented a luxury condo in West Hartford Center, the trendy part of town with expensive restaurants and boutique shops. She drove a new BMW, leased, Kowalski confirmed, but still $800 per month payment. She was a regular at high-end restaurants, often dining with a rotating cast of friends. And most interestingly, she'd been seen multiple times with a man named Gregory Chin, a real estate developer 15 years her junior. Kowalski couldn't prove they were romantically involved, but the photos he showed me, Margaret and Gregory holding hands at a restaurant, kissing goodbye outside her condo, made it pretty clear. She's living like someone with significant disposable income, Kowalski said, spreading the photos across my kitchen table. But according to public records, she's claiming poverty. She filed for assistance with her Medicare premiums last year, claiming financial hardship. This was the piece I'd been missing. Margaret wasn't just trying to stick me with the debt, she was actively hiding her assets and income. The money she'd stolen, the funds she'd transferred during our marriage, they were somewhere. Probably in accounts I didn't know about, possibly overseas or in someone else's name. Can you find the money? I asked. Kowalski grimaced. That's harder. If she's smart, and it sounds like she is, she's hidden it well. Offshore accounts, trusts in other people's names, cash. I can keep digging, but it'll cost you. Do it. Whatever it takes. While Kowalski investigated, I contacted an attorney. Not the one who'd handled my divorce, he'd been too accommodating, too focused on a quick settlement, but a shark. The kind of lawyer other lawyers warn their clients about. Her name was Patricia Vance, and she had a reputation for being ruthless in civil litigation. She was in her 50s, impeccably dressed, and had the kind of sharp intelligence that made you want to either hire her immediately or run in the opposite direction. I laid out my case in her corner office overlooking the Connecticut River. She listened without interrupting, taking occasional notes on a legal pad. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Mr. Thornton, she finally said, what exactly do you want to happen here? I want her to pay. I want the debt removed from my credit. I want her arrested, prosecuted, and sent to prison. I want everyone to know what she did. Patricia smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of a predator spotting wounded prey. That's a tall order. But I think we can get you most of it. She explained the strategy. We'd file a civil lawsuit against Margaret for fraud, identity theft, and breach of fiduciary duty, the last because as my spouse, she'd had a legal obligation not to defraud me. We'd seek damages for the full amount of the debt plus emotional distress, legal fees, and punitive damages. We'll depose her, Patricia said. Put her under oath and make her explain every charge, every account, every dollar. We'll subpoena her financial records, her phone records, her emails. We'll make her life hell until she either settles or we take her to trial. And the criminal case? That's up to the prosecutor. Detective Ramirez seems competent, she'll build the case. But criminal prosecutions for spousal identity theft are rare and difficult. The burden of proof is higher, and juries are sympathetic to estranged spouses. Our civil case, though, we only need to prove it by a preponderance of the evidence, not beyond a reasonable doubt. Much easier. What are our chances? Patricia leaned back in her chair. If the evidence is as strong as you say? Good. Very good. She'll probably try to settle once she realizes how much trouble she's in. But Mr. Thornton, you need to be prepared for this to get ugly. She'll fight back. She'll make accusations. She might try to drag your children into it, paint you as a vindictive ex-husband. This will be public, painful, and expensive. I don't care. I want her to face consequences. Then we're going to get along just fine. Patricia filed the lawsuit on a Friday in July, timing it so Margaret would be served over the weekend when she was less likely to immediately contact an attorney. It was a petty power play, but I appreciated it nonetheless. The lawsuit was detailed, 47 pages outlining every fraudulent account, every forged signature, every lie. We included the credit reports, the police report, the expert analysis of the forged signatures that Patricia had commissioned. We named Gregory Chin as a potential co-conspirator, though we didn't have enough evidence yet to prove he'd been involved. That was mainly to rattle Margaret, to make her wonder what we knew. It worked. On Monday morning, my phone rang. It was Sarah. "Dad, what the hell is going on? Mom called me crying, saying you're suing her, claiming she stole from you. She said you're trying to destroy her." I took a deep breath. "Sarah, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Everything in that lawsuit is true. Your mother opened credit cards and took out loans in my name without my knowledge or permission. She stole over $300,000 from me, and she's been spending it while I'm left with debt collectors calling me every day." "That's insane. Mom wouldn't do that. Read the lawsuit. It's public record. Go to the courthouse and get a copy, or I'll send you one. Look at the evidence. Look at the credit card statements, the signatures, the charges. Then tell me I'm lying." There was silence on the other end. Then, quietly, "She said you gave her permission? That it was an agreement between you two? If that were true, why didn't she disclose any of these debts during the divorce? Why did she let me walk away thinking we'd split everything fairly? Sarah, I know you love your mother. I loved her too once. But she's not the person you think she is." Another long silence. "I need to think about this. That's all I ask. Just think about it. Look at the evidence. Don't just take her word for it." She hung up without saying goodbye. Margaret hired an attorney, of course. A man named Richard Caldwell who had a reputation for defending white-collar criminals. He was good, expensive, and morally flexible. His first move was to file a motion to dismiss, arguing that the statute of limitations had expired on some of the claims, that the debt was marital debt, and therefore should have been addressed in the divorce, and that I'd failed to state a claim for which relief could be granted. Patricia demolished the motion in her response. She pointed out that identity theft has a 6-year statute of limitations that doesn't begin until the victim discovers the fraud. She noted that Margaret had actively concealed the debt during the divorce proceedings, which constituted fraud on the court. She attached affidavits from the creditors confirming I'd never authorized the accounts. The judge denied the motion to dismiss. Next came discovery. This was where Patricia truly shined. She issued subpoenas to every creditor, every bank Margaret had dealt with, even to Margaret's cell phone provider and internet service provider. She deposed Margaret's friends, asking about her lifestyle, her spending habits, whether she'd ever mentioned financial difficulties. And then came Margaret's deposition. I wasn't allowed in the room. Parties to a lawsuit rarely attend each other's depositions, but Patricia had it videotaped, and she showed me the highlights later. Margaret looked smaller than I remembered. Older. She wore a conservative dress and minimal jewelry, a calculated choice, I was sure, to look less affluent. But her eyes still had that sharp intelligence, that calculating quality I'd fallen in love with so many years ago. Patricia started gently. Basic questions about the marriage, the divorce, Margaret's current living situation. Margaret answered carefully, clearly coached by her attorney. Yes, the marriage had ended. No, there was no animosity on her part. She just wanted to move on with her life. Then Patricia started in on the credit cards. "Mrs. Thornton, or do you prefer Ms. Patterson now?" Margaret had reclaimed her maiden name after the divorce. "Ms. Patterson is fine. Ms. Patterson, are you familiar with a credit card account with Hartford Financial Group, account number ending in 4782? I'm not sure. I'd have to look at my records." Patricia slid a document across the table. "This is the application for that card. It's in your ex-husband's name, with his social security number. Do you recognize this signature?" Margaret barely glanced at it. "It looks like Robert's signature. Does it? Because we had a forensic document examiner analyze this signature. Her expert opinion is that it was not signed by Mr. Thornton, but rather by someone attempting to imitate his signature. Someone with access to samples of his actual signature. Someone like, perhaps, his wife of 37 years. Richard Caldwell jumped in. Objection. Argumentative. You're testifying rather than asking questions. Patricia smiled. I'll rephrase. Ms. Patterson, did you sign your ex-husband's name on this credit card application? No. Did you use the credit card account ending in 4782? I don't recall. Patricia pulled out another document. These are the statements for that account. The charges include purchases at Nordstrom in West Hartford, dinner at Max downtown in Hartford, spa services at a salon you're a regular customer of according to their records. Were those your purchases? Margaret's face was pale. Robert and I sometimes shopped together, or he would give me his cards to use. But you just said you didn't recall using this card. And Mr. Thornton says he never authorized you to use it, never received a copy of this card, and in fact never even knew this account existed until he received a collections notice this year. So which is it? Did you use the card with his knowledge, or without it? I need to consult with my attorney. And so it went for 4 hours. Patricia went through account after account, purchase after purchase, loan after loan. Margaret's story kept changing. First she didn't remember, then she claimed I'd authorized it, then she said we'd had an agreement. But she couldn't produce any evidence of this supposed agreement. No emails, no texts, no written documentation. Her attorney called for multiple breaks, clearly trying to get her story straight, but Patricia was relentless. The deposition broke something in Margaret. I could see it in the video. By hour 3, she was crying, her makeup running, looking every bit the 70-year-old woman she was rather than the polished sophisticate she pretended to be. I needed the money, she finally said, her voice breaking. Robert was always so controlling about finances, questioning every purchase I made. I felt like I had to ask permission to buy a new dress. So yes, I opened some accounts in his name. But he owed me that money. I spent 37 years raising his children, managing his home, supporting his career. I earned that money. Patricia leaned forward. By committing fraud? By taking what was rightfully mine. But it wasn't legally yours, was it? Because if it had been marital debt, you would have disclosed it during the divorce proceedings and let the court divide it. Instead, you hid it. You let Mr. Thornton walk away thinking you'd split things fairly, all while you'd already stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars from him. Isn't that right? Margaret didn't answer. Just sat there crying while her lawyer tried to salvage the situation. But the real breakthrough came from Kowalski, the private investigator. 2 weeks after Margaret's disastrous deposition, he called me with news. I found the money. Well, some of it. He came by my apartment that evening with a file folder full of documents. Bank statements from an account in the Cayman Islands, opened in the name of a shell corporation called Patterson Holdings Limited. The corporation's sole director and shareholder, according to the registration documents Kowalski had obtained through means I decided not to ask about, was Margaret. The account had a current balance of $412,847.33, more than the amount she'd stolen from me. Much more. There's more, Kowalski said. I tracked down some of the deposits into this account. A lot of it came from those credit cards and loans. She'd take cash advances, or write herself checks from the accounts, then deposit them offshore. But there's also money from other sources. Transfers from your joint accounts during the marriage that we already knew about. But also, look at this. He pointed to a series of deposits over the past 2 years, each for amounts between $5,000 and $15,000. They came every few months like clockwork. Gregory Chin, Kowalski said. Your ex-wife's boyfriend. He's been making deposits into her offshore account. I checked his financials. He's got money, but not as much as you'd think for a supposedly successful real estate developer. I think she's got something on him, or they're running some kind of scam together. I stared at the documents, my mind racing. This was beyond simple identity theft. This was money laundering, tax evasion, possibly even more crimes I didn't fully understand. What do we do with this? I asked. Kowalski smiled grimly. You give it to your lawyer and let her decide. But if I were you, I'd also give a copy to the IRS. Because I'm betting your ex-wife didn't report this income on her tax returns. Patricia's eyes lit up when I showed her Kowalski's findings. This changes everything. We're not just talking about civil fraud anymore. This is criminal fraud, tax evasion, and possibly RICO violations if Chin is involved in an ongoing scheme. She immediately filed an amended complaint, adding claims for unjust enrichment and seeking a constructive trust over the offshore account. She also, with my permission, forwarded everything to both the IRS and the FBI. The response was swift. The IRS opened an investigation into Margaret's tax returns for the past 7 years. The FBI started looking into whether the offshore account violated federal banking laws. And Detective Ramirez, suddenly with a lot more ammunition for her identity theft case, went back to the prosecutor and got an arrest warrant. They arrested Margaret on a Tuesday morning. She was having breakfast at a cafe in West Hartford Center when 2 detectives approached her table. I wasn't there. I learned about it later from Kowalski, who happened to have been surveilling her that morning, but apparently she made quite a scene. Screamed that she was being persecuted, that I was vindictive, that this was all a misunderstanding. They charged her with 11 counts of identity theft, 6 counts of forgery, and 3 counts of wire fraud. Bail was set at $500,000. Gregory Chin, who'd been arrested the same morning at his office, put up his house as collateral to bail her out. His loyalty was touching, in a misguided sort of way. The criminal trial was scheduled for the following spring, but the civil case was moving faster. Patricia filed a motion for summary judgment, arguing that the evidence was so overwhelming that there was no need for a trial. Margaret's lawyer opposed it, but weakly. The judge agreed with Patricia on most of the claims, setting up a trial only on the amount of damages. But Margaret never made it to trial. 2 weeks before the civil case was set to begin, Richard Caldwell called Patricia with a settlement offer. Margaret would admit liability for the fraudulent debts, agreed to have them transferred entirely into her name, and pay me $150,000 from the offshore account in exchange for me dropping the civil suit. Not enough, I told Patricia. Not even close. Agreed. I'll counter. We demanded full restitution, every penny of the fraudulent debt, plus $200,000 for emotional distress, plus legal fees, plus interest. Total, $647,382. 19. And she had to liquidate the offshore account, report it to the IRS, and pay any back taxes owed. Caldwell balked. Said his client didn't have that kind of money. Said we were being unreasonable. Patricia's response was brutal. Your client has over $400,000 in an offshore account she never reported to the IRS. She's facing criminal charges that carry up to 20 years in federal prison. She's 67 years old. Does she really want to spend her golden years in a federal penitentiary? Because that's where she's headed unless she settles this case and cooperates with the authorities. They came back with a counteroffer, $450,000, full restitution on the debts, and she'd cooperate with the IRS investigation in exchange for leniency. We were getting closer. The negotiations took weeks. Margaret wanted to keep some of the offshore money, wanted the charges reduced, wanted me to make a statement to the prosecutor requesting leniency. I refused all of it. This wasn't about money anymore, though I certainly wanted my money back. This was about accountability. The final settlement, reached in December, gave me almost everything I wanted. Margaret admitted in writing that she had committed identity theft and fraud against me. She agreed to full restitution. Every fraudulent debt would be transferred into her name, and she would pay me $312,847. 66 to make me whole. She would liquidate the offshore account and pay all back taxes, penalties, and interest to the IRS.